guys, Tyler Forrester for RunItOnce.com. Today we're going to be going over small stakes rake effects. And it turns out that I think a lot of the players that watch the videos are under the impression that these rake effects at small stakes make a big difference in how our strategy plays. And what we're going to see through this video is that might not necessarily be true. What might be true is that our value, the amount of money we win per 100 hands, goes down drastically as our rake increases, but the actual strategies that are solid, that are GTO, that are good exploitive play, don't change a lot based on these rake structures. It just happens to be that in these situations, we're going to lose more money in these spots to the house, so we can't make as much money for ourselves. And the model I ran here was over 22 flops, and I ran it in a button versus big blind situation, kind of under the idea that this would be one of the spots where it would be most likely that the rake structure could be the most troubling. And my ranges here, which I played, were 60% for the big blind. I gave them some sort of merged range for 3-betting plus some polarization, kind of just trying to reflect the player pool. And then the in-position player here, I gave 43%, which you could debate me on this. Most players raise between 40 and 55%. So this is, maybe a little bit tighter than your average player, but certainly well within bounds of how people play on the button. And then I gave some relatively basic strategies the in-position player for turn and river sizes, so 75 on each street. And then I gave the out-of-position player a couple of different bet sizes. The idea here wasn't necessarily that these were optimal. I just wanted to recreate a out-of-position player that had a strong strategy. And I know by picking 3 bet sizes, I'm not going to make any big mistakes via bet sizing on the turn and river, because what we found with Pio Sims is if you don't give some variation in bet sizing or strategy, if there's a better strategy, Pio's not going to know about it. So this is just to approximate a strong out of position player. And then I capped the rake in this particular sim at 3 big blinds, so it was 5% up to 3 big blinds. And I looked at 2 spots here. I looked at a spot where we had a 28% c-bet size, which really is me being finicky with my sizings. We could look at 33. You're going to have roughly the same effects. And a 75% sizing. So we had we compared 2 different sizings in a 3 big blind cap environment, and then I also went ahead and took an 8 big blind cap environment. So the 8 big blind cap environment is akin to 25-50 cent on ignition. The 3 big blind cap is going to be more equivalent to something like 100 NL at Party Poker or Poker Stars. And what I found here was that, in general, at equilibrium, these strategies get roughly the same amount of value. It looks like the small c-bet here is probably a little bit better. So here it wins about 297 in big blinds per 100. So it's maybe a big blind better 100 than the 75x sizing. And then if we take it up to 8 big blinds 100, it looks like it might even be upwards of like 1.6 big blinds 100 better. I'm a little bit hesitant to get this precise with these numbers, because ultimately in these situations, there's going to be some variability in the sims. I'm going to have stopped them at different points in time. We're talking about the 3rd decimal point place or the 4th decimal place here. So this is something that could still be moving within Pio. But in general here, you'll see that there isn't a lot of difference between these 2 c-bet strategies values. And it looks like the small c-bet's still better in higher rake environments. In fact, if we look at this, it looks like it might even gain a little bit of value, possibly, in higher rake environments. And we see in general that our c-bet strategy doesn't change a lot here between the 3 big blind and the 8 big blind cap either. For the 75% c-bet sizing, our mean c-bet percentage is 55%. If it goes up to 8 big blinds, it's 55, 55.5, and then it goes to 54.9. And the exact opposite happens with the smaller sizing. So it actually we see bet slightly more often at the 8 big blind cap, which leads me to believe that variability in these situations is probably a large part of the change in value. So essentially, this is noise in your PioSim my PioSim that's creating this. And interestingly here, if we take a look at this by board in this situation, we see that there really isn't a lot of boards here where the 75% c-bet performs better. With a 3 big blind cap, really you're looking at something like 9-6 deuce. It looks like the 75% performs a little bit better. And then with the 28%, we see that on ace 9-3 and of course queen 8 and maybe king 10-5. Those are the board textures where the 28% c-bet sizing ends up being maybe slightly better at equilibrium for these situations. You're going to note that I didn't compare this against a lower rake environment like a quarter big blind or a 0 big blind environment. I'm going to keep those sims proprietary, mainly because I still need to make a living playing poker. So here with 8 big blind caps, so now we're moving into like 25-50 cent land. We see roughly the same divide in these situations. The purple line here is the 75% sizing, and the green line here is the 28% sizing. So we see roughly the same results. Maybe we've got a slight switch here on king queen 8, and maybe we have a slight switch here on Jack 8-5. We're now using a slightly bigger sizing, but certainly for more EV. But certainly these are very consistent with each other. In fact, the Jack 8-5 was just a situation that I missed on this graphic. So in general, in these spots, our EVs, it looks like the small sizing is probably a little bit better in high rake environments. It's definitely going to be dependent on board texture. It does look like on some board textures that the bigger bet might be more effective. So does our strategy change based on this? So in this situation, I've taken a look here at what happens if we always bet 75% of pot in these situations. How does this change based on the different rakes? So if my cap is at 8 big blinds or is my cap is at 3 big blinds, do I significantly change my c-betting strategy? And I think looking at this graphic, I think the answer is pretty much obviously no. There is going to be no board where I'm going to make a drastic change to my c-betting strategy based on my rake cap. If we look here, we see maybe some minor differences here, like 1 to 2% on some board textures, but ultimately no one's going to be executing these strategies that precisely. At this point in time, it's difficult enough to play a GTO strategy, much less hit the c-betting percentage within a couple of percentage points in these situations. The best players in the world are going to be, within 5% of this strategy. And if you were within 5% of this strategy, you would be making a lot of money at small stakes, and you wouldn't be playing it. So at this point in time, the effects are essentially negligible for the bigger sizings. The next question is that also true for the smaller sizings? Maybe in the smaller sizings, it's possible that we're going to see more variability in our strategy based on rake caps. And I think again, almost unequivocally, this answer is no. There is going to be no difference in your strategy based on a 3 big blind rake cap or an 8 big blind rake cap. You're still going to play the same c-bet strategy no matter where your rake cap is. You're simply going to make less money in these situations when you're versus a higher rake cap, because the house is taking more of the money. But the equilibrium for both players is shifted down. The equilibrium strategies aren't changing very much, if at all. So in summary here, when you're playing a small stakes game, you should be looking at it the same way that you're playing a mid stakes or high stakes game. The rake caps in these situations don't seem to affect your strategies very drastically. Ultimately, you see small changes based on the rake cap, and nothing that's going to make you completely overhaul your game. Which should help you guys, because ultimately you're going to be able to use some of the videos that Sauce and I make, or Kevin Rabishow or Ilias, and that's going to give you some That's going to give you some insight in how to play small stakes poker. And you're going to know that the strategies that we use aren't going to be very different from the ones that you should be using.
Hey guys, this is Dvoress for RunAtOnce.com. I've got something different for you guys today. This video is going to be talking about what I think the effects of the recent Rakeback and VIP system changes over at PokerStars will be, how they will affect you, how I think they will affect the poker economy in general, and some adjustments that you should maybe think about making. So I think that at this point, everyone that is even slightly affected by these changes has heard the news. If you haven't, there is at least one thread that I know of on Run It Once here that talks about them. There's also a huge thread in Internet Poker in 2+2. There's another big thread in the NVG forums on 2+2. So if you haven't heard, look it up. I'm not going to be covering the details of what the changes actually are in this video. So originally the idea for this video was inspired by one of Sean LaForte's older videos. It was released on September 6th, 2013. And it's the one where he talks about rake effects on choosing your blind versus blind strategy. Whether it's better to open raise or limp at various stakes. So if you haven't watched that video, I do think that you should watch it just generally, not to watch this one, but it's a great video that teaches you how to be analytical and just do some math. This video, however, is not going to cover that same spot. I do think that that is one of the spots that you should potentially look into yourselves, and when you do the math on it with Rakeback included, and then maybe do the math on it with less Rakeback now for next year. But this video is not going to look at the same spot and just, do it with various types of Rakeback. The purpose of this video is something very different. I just want to have a general discussion of the recent Rakeback changes over at PokerStars, how I think they will affect the poker economy, how they are likely to affect some of the games that run, especially the higher stakes games. I have a lot of different thoughts that are not always connected to each other with regards to the topic, and I thought that this would be a good opportunity to share those thoughts with you guys, and perhaps to spark some discussion and thought within the community. Some of the things that I'll be talking about are a little bit more theoretical, some are practical, but everything that I want to cover I've done through example. So even if you don't like doing a lot of math or you're not good at it, the way I've set up the examples is going to provide you guys with something intuitive to work with, and then you can kind of look at the examples that I gave and see how they apply to the games that you play, and therefore figure out how the recent changes will affect you in the games that you play, and then make the necessary adjustments. Let's get down to some specifics. So the first example that I have here is going to be used to illustrate how players with different win rates pre-Rakeback are going to be affected differently and at different rates by the changes depending on their win rate. And just conceptually, I want to illustrate that kind of all else being equal, if many players play kind of roughly the same number of hours and generate roughly the same amount in rake, that the change in their hourly is going to be not a linear change, but an absolute change. So it's not like Rakeback is cut by, let's say, 30%, so everyone makes 30% less. It's just going to be an absolute number that everyone is going to be making less per hour. So depending on how much you are making per hour currently, the changes are going to matter more or less for you. Everyone's going to be making less as a result of the changes, but the more you are winning, the less bad the changes are for you. So the example that I've come up with is pretty theoretical, but I think is very easy to intuitively understand and also pretty transferable to other games. I used sit and goes just because I wanted to use kind of round numbers, and it's easier to make an example with sit and goes, but you can definitely do the exact same thing and just replace ROI win rates with BB per 100 win rates at a particular stake. The math is the same. So my assumptions are that last year you played 36,000 sit and goes, which were 95 plus $5 buy-in. It took you 2,000 hours to play them, so you're looking at 40-hour work weeks where you take 2 weeks off in a year. You generated 180,000 in RAKE, which is very close to the exact number that you would have needed to generate to attain Supernova Elite. And Rakeback is about 67% last year for Supernova Elites, so you got about 120k in Rakeback. These numbers are not precisely what they are for Supernova Elite, but they're very close and they're nice round numbers, so I decided to use these ones. So let's look at players who win at different rates and the pay cuts that they're going to incur as a result of the changes. So let's say that you were the boss of $100 sit and goes last year. So you had a 5% ROI. You absolutely crushed them. I don't think that there is anyone that did this at this sort of buy-in last year, but a few years ago there were certainly guys doing stuff like this, and it is possible still that some players, had they been forced to play $100 sit and goes and no higher, could definitely attain this in a 2015-2016 game environment. But stick with me here, even if you don't think these numbers are reflective of reality for this first example, because this example is going to be transferable to other games, so kind of pay attention to the concepts. So last year, you made 180k pre-Rakeback, $5 a game, 36,000 games. You made another 120k from Rakeback, so in total you made $300,000. This year, I'm assuming that the game conditions will be the same, and for next year also. Rakeback is going to be capped at 45%. So the only thing that changes is instead of 120k in Rakeback, you get 81k. So now you make $261,000, which is $19.50 less per hour, but because your hourly was so high to begin with, it's only a 13% pay cut. And then next year, when Rakeback is going to be capped at, let's say, 30%, you will make $234,000. Again, a very relevant $33 per hour pay cut, but it's manageable. It's a 22% pay cut 2 years from now. Not the best, but we're still definitely more than in business here. But this is a player with a very, very high win rate that I think is unattainable for many people, especially with the games getting tougher and tougher. So this middle example is, I think, much more reflective of a higher percentage of regulars in various games. So now we're looking at someone with a 2% pre-Rakeback ROI. And once you hit a 2% pre-Rakeback ROI in a $100 sit and go that has $5 in rake, most of your winnings last year would have come from Rakeback. So you would have made $72,000 from the sit and goes themselves. Pre-Rakeback, you would have made another $120k in Rakeback, so overall you would have made $192,000. This year, you'll make $153,000, which is a 20% pay cut, and next year you'll make $126,000, which is a 34% pay cut. So assuming game conditions are the same, if 2 years from now your rakeback is going to be capped at 30%, and you're still a 2% pre-rakeback ROI player, you're going to be making more than a third less 2 years from now than you are currently. And this is very much cause for concern, of course. And this is something that, if you're kind of in this category, you definitely need to think about either a lifestyle change or a way to improve your pre-rakeback win rate. Because this sort of pay cut is very, very concerning and just very, very big, and is going to impact your life in a very relevant way. Now, this bottom example is dealing with someone who is quite a large loser pre-rakeback, but they're still making pretty decent money post-rakeback. So let's say you have a minus 2.5% ROI. So you would have lost $90,000 pre-rakeback last year, but you made $120K in rakeback, so overall you made $30,000. Now, you might look at this and say, $30,000, what's a guy that's playing $100 sit and goes doing, quote unquote, only making $30,000 a year, playing so many hours? But I think that is a very incorrect way of looking at it. First of all, $30,000 is a lot of money. You're looking at $15 an hour, which is substantially higher than the minimum wage in pretty much every country, I think, except maybe a few countries in Europe. $30,000 is definitely a very large amount of money if you are a professional who lives in a country with a lower minimum wage. There are definitely professional poker players making about $30,000 US per year. And I believe that this bottom example is pretty reflective of quite a lot of people, actually. Maybe not so many at specifically the $100 sit and go level, but I know that there are quite a lot of guys who play, let's say, $60 sit and goes that would be putting up numbers kind of near this, and if they're making Supernova Elite, kind of having the same hourly, the same profits. There are also guys who are playing higher stakes sit and goes who are going to be making a little bit more per hour, but are still described in this example, but losing a little bit less in terms of percentage ROI, just because in higher buy and sit and goes the rake tends to be lower. And there are certainly a lot of guys playing low to mid stakes cash who are roughly in this ballpark. Losing a couple of BBs per 100 pre-rakeback. How much you can lose and still make money, of course, depends on the stakes that you're playing. But there's a bunch of guys who are losing between $30,000 to $90,000 pre-rakeback. They make Supernova Elite, and they still made a good living last year with the rakeback. So this bottom example is, I think, very, very relevant, and also super relevant if you are someone who is putting in a lot of volume but are trying to get better, trying to move up stakes, etc. So let's see what happens to this kind of player. Now, like we said, we are making $15 an hour. Last year, we can see that the cut in hourly, like we talked about, is absolute regardless of what you make, given that you play 2,000 hours and given that you generate 180,000 in rake. So of course, now when rakeback is capped at 45%, you're going to be a losing player. Last year you were making $15 an hour. This year you're making $19.50 less per hour, so you're going to be losing $4.50 per hour. You play 2,000 hours, and you lose $9,000 this year. Next year you'll lose $36,000. Assuming the same game conditions, assuming you're, of the same skill level relative to everyone else. And of course, this is super concerning, and if you are a player that falls into this category, you're going to have to make some changes.